My husband thinks I'm pregnant, but something's terribly wrong. It started with the nausea, a queasiness that rolled over me in waves, leaving me pale and shaky. Mark, my husband, beamed when I told him. That's it, he said, grabbing my hand and squeezing tight. That's gotta be it. We'd been trying for months, meticulously tracking cycles and ovulation windows. The home tests confirmed it, a faint but undeniable second line appearing each time. Mark was ecstatic, already sketching nursery ideas and picking out names. I wanted to be too, but a creeping unease gnawed at me. The symptoms were intense, more than I'd expected, even accounting for first-time pregnancy jitters. The doctor's visit should have calmed my nerves. Dr. Hayes, my obgyn, was professional and reassuring. She congratulated us, ordered blood work, and handed me a stack of pamphlets about prenatal care. Just routine, she said with a smile, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. The blood test came back inconclusive. Dr. Hayes shrugged it off. Sometimes it happens. Let's retest in a week, probably just a fluke, but it wasn't a fluke. The nausea worsened, morphing into violent retching that left me weak and dehydrated. Exhaustion clung to me like a shroud. I could barely get out of bed. And the cravings, they were bizarre, not pickles and ice cream, but raw meat. Dirt. Things that made my stomach churn just thinking about them normally. Then came the nightmares. Vile, twisted things that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Shadowy figures lurking in the corners of our bedroom, their faces obscured by darkness. Grotesque imagery of writhing, pulsating masses. I'd wake up screaming, heart pounding, soaked in a cold sweat. Mark would hold me, whispering soothing words, but I could see the worry etched on his face. Maybe you should talk to someone, he suggested gently one morning after I'd spent the entire night sobbing. Maybe this is just anxiety. It's common, honey, I snapped. Anxiety? You think I'm imagining all this? I'm growing a human being inside me, Mark. This isn't anxiety. The fight hung heavy in the air, a wedge driven between us by something I couldn't explain. He tried, I knew he did, but he couldn't understand. He wasn't experiencing it. He wasn't feeling this wrongness. Our house, a renovated farmhouse on the outskirts of town, started to feel oppressive. The old floorboards creaked and groaned at night, even when there was no wind. Lights flickered for no reason. I swore I saw things moving in the periphery of my vision, shadows dancing in the corners of my eyes. Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor, didn't help. She was a sweet, seemingly harmless woman, always eager to chat over the fence. But lately, her conversations had taken a darker turn. That's a lovely house you have there, she'd say, her eyes twinkling with a knowing glint. But it's got a history, you know. This whole area does. She'd launch into rambling stories about the town's past, whispers of strange rituals, unexplained disappearances, and a dark entity that was supposedly tied to the land. I dismissed it as senile ramblings, but her words burrowed under my skin, feeding my paranoia. They say the land remembers, she said one afternoon, leaning conspiratorially close. And sometimes it wants to be fed. One day I was at the pharmacy, picking up more anti-nausea medication which barely touched the sides anymore. The technician, a young woman with piercing blue eyes, stared at me with unnerving intensity. "You're glowing," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but not in a good way. I recoiled, clutching my prescription. "What do you mean?" She shook her head, her eyes darting around nervously. "Just be careful." The same thing happened at the grocery store. A young clerk scanned my items, then paused, his gaze lingering on my swollen abdomen. He swallowed hard, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling, Are you all right?" I mumbled a thanks and fled, the weight of their stares pressing down on me. I felt like I was walking around with a visible mark, a sign that screamed, something is wrong here. I started researching the history of the house, scouring old newspapers and town records. I found whispers of strange occurrences, unsolved mysteries, and a local legend about a cult that had practiced dark rituals on the land centuries ago. They worshipped an ancient entity, a being of immense power and insatiable hunger. My friend Brenda was the only person I could confide in. I told her everything, the symptoms, the nightmares, the strange encounters, the growing sense of dread. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. "Eliza," she said, "this sounds serious. Have you thought about getting a second opinion? Maybe Dr. Hayes isn't taking you seriously enough." I knew she was right. I scheduled an appointment with a specialist in a nearby city, desperate for answers. But the day before the appointment, I received a call from Dr. Hayes' office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," the receptionist said, her voice clipped and impersonal. "Your referral has been canceled. Dr. Hayes believes that any further testing is unnecessary at this time." I felt a surge of panic. Why was she blocking me? What was she hiding? That night, the pain started. A searing, agonizing pain that ripped through my abdomen, leaving me gasping for breath. It felt like something was tearing its way out of me. I screamed, a primal, animalistic sound that echoed through the house. Mark rushed in, his face white with terror. He tried to touch me, to comfort me, but I recoiled, pushing him away. I could see the horror in his eyes as he looked at my distended belly, the veins throbbing under my skin like grotesque worms. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What's happening to you?" I didn't know. All I knew was that I wasn't pregnant, not with a baby. Something else was growing inside me, something dark and monstrous. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I drove to Dr. Hayes' office, ignoring Mark's frantic calls. It was late, the building deserted. I found the door unlocked and slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I found her in her office, hunched over a desk, her face illuminated by the glow of a computer screen. She looked up, startled, her eyes widening in alarm. "Eliza," she stammered, "what are you doing here? What's happening to me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage and fear. "What did you do?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously. Then she sighed, a defeated, resigned sound. "You wouldn't understand," she said softly. "Understand what? That I'm being used as a vessel for some kind of monster." Her silence was confirmation. "This town," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "it's different. It's always been different. The land, it's fertile, but not just for crops. For other things." She told me about the cult, the rituals, the entity they worshipped. She told me about the sacrifices they made, the pact they forged with the darkness. And she told me that the entity was awakening again, drawn by my presence, by my vulnerability. "I tried to protect you," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought if I could just control it, delay it, but it's too strong. It's already inside you." I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I was paralyzed by fear. I was a prisoner in my own body, a host for something ancient and evil. Mark found me there, slumped against the wall, sobbing. He saw Dr. Hayes, her face pale and drawn, and he knew, he understood. The fear in his eyes was mirrored in mine. We went to Mrs. Gable, desperate for help. She listened to our story, her eyes widening with a mixture of horror and understanding. "The old ways," she whispered, "they're not forgotten. There are things you can do. Rituals, banishments." She told us about an ancient ritual, a way to sever the connection between me and the entity. It was dangerous, she warned us, and there was no guarantee it would work. But it was our only hope. The ritual was performed under the pale light of the moon in the woods behind our house. We used ingredients Mrs. Gable provided, herbs and stones and symbols that felt both alien and disturbingly familiar. The air crackled with energy, a palpable sense of dread that made my skin crawl. As I chanted the ancient words, I felt the entity within me stir. It fought back, a violent, agonizing struggle that threatened to tear me apart. I saw flashes of grotesque imagery, felt the searing pain of its presence. Mark held me tight, his voice trembling as he repeated the incantations. He was my anchor, my lifeline in the swirling vortex of darkness. The ritual reached its climax. A wave of energy surged through me, burning away the shadows, severing the connection. I screamed, a long, piercing wail that echoed through the woods. Then silence. I collapsed, weak and trembling, into Mark's arms. The pain was gone, the nightmares subsided. I felt empty, but the emptiness was unsettling, too quiet, too complete. Detective Harding arrived a week later, investigating the disappearances of several townspeople. The disappearances tied to the woods around our house. He asked us questions, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. We told him what we could, careful to omit the parts that would sound insane. The investigation stalled. The disappearances remained unsolved. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, eager to forget the darkness that had briefly surfaced. But I couldn't forget. I still felt it, lurking just beneath the surface, a dormant presence waiting for its chance to re-emerge. One night, weeks after the ritual, I woke up with a craving. Not for raw meat or dirt, but for something far more disturbing. I craved the taste of blood. I looked at Mark, sleeping soundly beside me, his face peaceful and untroubled. And I wondered if the ritual had truly banished the entity, or if it had simply been suppressed. Waiting, the moon was full, casting long, eerie shadows across the bedroom. I got out of bed, drawn by an irresistible force. I walked to the window and looked out at the woods, their dark depths beckoning. And I smiled.